So we are going to be talking today about the Anapanasati Sutta that we had mentioned before. This is Anapanasati Sutta number 117 in the Majjhima Nikaya, and this sutta is kind of a tie-in sutta for a lot of other sutras. That in fact the word Pali and the word sutta itself, both these words have to do with a thread or a string in the sense of weaving a garment or a cloth, and that the Buddha's teaching is known as like a cloth that has no rents, no holes, no broken places, no places where it had to be rewoven or redone. And if you'll notice, Christianity, for instance, over the course of the past 2,000 years, that Christianity has evolved, that there's been a lot of philosophy built up around it to try to, let us say, explain and justify the various aspects of it. For one thing, in the original, there was no Trinity, but eventually there became a Trinity.
So I'm recording this. Go on.
No, it's okay. She can stay. I don't care.
What to say?
And so, this particular sutta is one that is like a connecting thread that connects a lot of other suttas together, and that it also has a particular quality about it, that in the beginning, when it opens up, it talks about how many people are there in attendance with this, and it lists a whole number of monks. It was on an Upasatha day on the 15th of a full moon, and it was a place where there was a ceremony going on, and it was held at the Savatha's Eastern Park at the palace of Megara's mother. Now, Megara was a nobleman who was also a student of the Buddha, and I think eventually became a monk. There was the Venerable Sariputta, Mahamagala, Mahakassapa, Mahakachana, Mahakatitha, Mahakapina, Mahakachanda. Mahakachanda was the original charioteer and horse groom for the Buddha when he became a monk. When he left the palace, he took Chanda with him, so Chanda was with him throughout his entire career. Anuradha, Ravata, Ananda, and other well-known disciples. Well, if Ananda was there, that meant that this was also in the later part of his life, that it was in the second half or at late times. It also talks about many of the monks having a large number of students, 30, 40, 50 students at a time. Let me see if I can get the dog to be quiet. Paxan, come here. Come here. No, he's got something he's talking to. So now, a lot of people would think about a university environment where the senior monk has a group of student monks the way that you would have a class of students. But it's much better to think of these as more of graduate students that are not actually in a class, but that they have a lot of familiarity and a lot of close association with the teacher while they're just living. And that some of the students will come early in the teacher's career, and some of them late, some of them over a period of years. And so when we're talking about having 30 or 40 students, that doesn't mean that they're all in lockstep regimen or whatever, but that they did come with the teacher to this special occasion, this special event. Now, one of the things that makes this sutta a little bit different also is that it like I said, has a thread of working together with a lot of other suttas, that in fact you could think of this one as sort of an overarching framework of the entire path of the Buddha, in the sense of the practice itself, or the practical method. So you can think of it in the sense of that there's actually two parts of any teaching. There is the didactic and the experimental, is the way, or experiential is the way that the psychologists would talk about it, or class and lab would be the way that it would be done in science. And so within the Buddhist context, you have sort of the Buddhist philosophy or teaching about what this is all about, and then how to go about it. And so this one is mainly from the position of the what to do or how to go about it, but it ties directly in with the teaching of what this is all about, especially when we get into the what's called the Dhamma, which I'll get into very soon. Also, in the beginning of the sutta, he talks about various students and what their various practices are, but that mostly people who came to the Buddha in the beginning would bring their own practice, that many different people had many different spiritual practices in the time of the Buddha, and that they, when they would come to join with the Buddha, they would bring whatever they already had thought or remembered or whatever, and some of them continued to practice that. But the Buddha recommended Anapanasati for several reasons, and one of them is that it is an effective system that works for everyone, to where other systems work for some people and not for others. For instance, mantras, or staring at a particular image or gaze or whatever like this, staring into a fire, staring into water. Many of these different practices were in vogue in the time of the Buddha, but one of the main qualities of Anapanasati is not only is it something that you can do at any particular time. You don't have to set up anything. There's no device that you're going to use. There's no practice or anything like that, or rituals that you have to start doing. You just can start with Anapanasati at any particular moment. And that the next quality of it is that because you're taking it with you all the time, it's also something on the inside, to where most of the meditation practices before that had the quality of doing something on the outside, a visual meditation, an auditory meditation, something like that. But the meditation that the Buddha is teaching is actually something to be done on the inside. And that's eventually going to be the most important, because really what the whole quality of the Buddhist teaching is to investigate what's going on the inside of the mind. Okay, and
Right.
so then the Buddha maps out the reason that to practice Anapanasati is for the fulfillment of the Satipatthana. Now, the Satipatthana is in fact a different sutta. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, which is number 10 in the Majjhima Nikaya, it also references other things. And so it's also a tie-in. So when the Anapanasati Sutta references number 10 talks about the hindrances, which is a reference to Sutta number 39. Also in the Satipatthana Sutta, it mentions the 7 factors of enlightenment, which is also referenced in the Anapanasati Sutta. And also the Eightfold Noble Path is mentioned in the Satipatthana Sutta, especially the Mahasatipatthana Sutta in the Dinga Nikaya. So all of these things tie in together. Now, when we practice Anapanasati, we practice it for the fulfillment of the Satipatthana, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is the body, feelings, the mind itself, and the objects of the mind, which correspond to the 4 elements that are famous throughout all of antiquity. The Greeks had them, the Romans had it, the Hindus had it, and that was the quality of earth, water, fire, and air, which are the 4 original elements that the Greeks talked about. And that the body then becomes the earth, the feelings become the water, the mind becomes the fire, and the thoughts or the contents of the mind become the air. Okay, and so with that Satipatthana, those, by the way, the word patana has the word that's the same word as pedestal, or we can use it in the word of foot, or footing, or pedestal, like the word peta. That's because it comes out of the Indo-European languages, and so the word that we have for pedestal is exactly the same word for the word patana, which is like a footing or a pedestal or a foundation for mindfulness. In other words, this is the foundation of which we're going to have our mindfulness. We're going to have mindfulness of the body, we're going to have mindfulness of the feelings, we're going to have mindfulness of the mind and the conditions of the mind, and also mindfulness of the contents of the mind. This is where the basic practice is for the teaching of the Buddha. And this mindfulness of these 4 qualities is the practice of Anapanasati. And so Anapanasati then is broken into these 4 parts, and that each of these 4 parts have actually 4 pieces within each other. So there is like 4 quadrads, giving what they call 16 steps. But it's not steps, it's just sort of aspects. And so then, if we practice Anapanasati for the fulfillment of mindfulness of the foundations, that will fulfill or bring on the quality of the fulfillment for the 7 factors of enlightenment, which we'll get into soon. And that the fulfillment of the 7 factors of enlightenment is for the fulfillment of the final goal, which is broken into 2 parts, and that is knowledge and deliverance. The word is deliverance is used, but we're talking about deliverance in the sense of freedom, or deliverance from slavery, or deliverance from bondage, this kind of deliverance. But you can also think about it in the sense of deliverance of a package, that if you have a very, very heavy package and you take it to the post office, it's going to be hard for them to deliver, and they're going to want a lot of money. But if it's a very lightweight package, then it's easy to deliver. So that's another aspect of the way to look at it. This deliverance that is talked about is basically a deliverance from the heavy things that we normally carry around, that we drop them away, we let go of them. And so this is where the real deliverance is coming from, is the unburdening. But the unburdening has to be done correctly. It has to be done knowledgeably. So we are often left in Buddhism with this word enlightenment, and a lot of people will put a lot of connotations on what this word enlightenment actually means. I'm actually not against the word. A better actual word would be awakening, or to wake up, to see how things really are. But the word enlightenment has some very interesting qualities to it, and that is that the word enlightenment has the word light, which means that you turn on a light or that you can see, you can become knowledgeable about something. And then the other quality of enlightenment is that it's lightweight, that it doesn't weigh very much, that it's easy to manage. And so these are the two qualities of enlightenment, and that it is possible that they can happen one after the other. It's possible that they can happen instantaneously at the same time, but normally that is not the occasion. Normally one will become knowledgeable about what the path is that will take them to deliverance, and then it'll take quite a long time for them to walk this path. But the best part of it is that if they're walking the path correctly, they're at least enjoying the path now. That it's not a hard path. That one of the big problems that I see within the way that Buddhism taught is that it's not taught in the context of good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. That a lot of students, when they start to practice meditation, will in fact go through a lot of suffering that is unnecessary because of, let us say, history or traditions, or that the teacher is trying to teach the way that he was taught rather than trying to keep up with where the students are. And so if you're working with students at the point they are, then we can help them coming out of their suffering more and more every step along the way. But if Buddhism is taught incorrectly, it in fact will become almost like a boot camp for some. It'll be very difficult to do, and anytime that something like that is difficult, it's not giving any real advantage.
Okay.
That in fact the whole quality of joy and the quality of a happy investigation is basically the foundation, because that's what really is going to be the deliverance, is the deliverance of all of the stuff that we're carrying around that we really don't want to look at. The best part about it is that we really don't have to look at it that much. We only have to look at it enough to say, yeah, I can let go of that too. Instead of going through a lot of pain and suffering over sitting postures or practices that are too difficult for the student or whatever like that. That in fact one of the biggest problems that students will have is that they demand success faster than uh, than they're wanting instantaneous results, I guess, is the way to do it, rather than enjoying the path. So it's the analogy is the kids in the back seat of the car saying, when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? When in fact they could be having a lot of fun along the way instead. This is especially true in the concept of the monkey mind. That many people, when they begin to start practicing meditation, they'll see how difficult it is to keep the mind focused on something, and that's not the right way of looking at it. It's much more important to look at it from the concept of, I can start again, I can build a new habit, I can get this started, I don't have to continue down that path, I don't have to suffer over the fact that I was on the wrong path, I can turn around now and go down the right path. And so maybe this is a point that we can break this particular taping, and I can go take care of what Kitty wants, and then I'll come back and we'll continue on, okay?
Sure, yeah.
All right, good. All right, Kitty, what you want? All right, so we were talking about knowledge and deliverance as the two qualities of, let us say, the results of the path, or the reason for practicing the path of the Buddha. And that these two things tied together actually are a reference over to another sutta, number 117, which is called the Great 40, which is an exposition on the Eightfold Noble Path, which actually, the way that it starts out, that it's what is noble right concentration with its prerequisites, that then they go into the most important part of that sutta is on right view. But it winds up being that at the end of the path, when instead of being an eightfold path, it becomes a tenfold path, where knowledge and vision, as well as deliverance, are then added to the eightfold path, making it a tenfold path instead. So at the time, let us say at one point, it becomes a ninefold path, and then eventually a tenfold path when knowledge and vision is added to it. But another way of looking at it is that when you get right knowledge, that's another way of saying that now right view becomes really noble right view. And so this is what this sutta is really about. It's about the kind of knowledge that's gained that gives one a noble perspective, or what is true knowledge. And so this is the reason for the path of Anapanasati, is to develop the four foundations of mindfulness. The four foundations of mindfulness of Satipatthana is for the Sambhujana, or the 7 factors of enlightenment. And it's through the 7 factors of enlightenment that knowledge and deliverance are then generated, which then, with especially the point of knowledge, is what makes one noble, or the change of lineage, or the, let us say, the first stage of enlightenment. Now, historically, there's actually 4 stages of enlightenment, but the middle 2 stages are not really important. The really important one is, in fact, the first one, which is where true knowledge goes. When one comes to the point of true knowledge, the rest of the path is not predetermined or bound in the sense of the outside, but it's bound on the sense of the inside. Once one has real true knowledge of what is the path and what is not the path, and the reasons for doing the path, one then is bound in their own volition to continue along with the path. It's like that's the only way to go. And that this is the state of what is called sotapan, which is where true knowledge arises. And that's also is what makes the path a noble path.
Right. Is that stream entry?
That is the stream entry, right. The entrance of the stream, or the sotapan. And that what you could also think of that is that it's the stream into the stream of reality, or the stream of your own consciousness finally, or other ways of looking at it are like be here now, or this present moment. Is everything is constantly flowing, that every moment goes to the next moment, to the next moment, to the next moment. And the concept of being a sotapan means is that you're entering the stream of reality.
Okay.
Okay, as opposed to clinging to the vines of our own mind, clinging to the vines of the past. And so back now to the position of Anapanasati. Most people think of, and in fact often it's taught as steps, and that they will practice step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and they probably will never get from step 3 to step 4 because they're not practicing correctly, that in fact these steps of Anapanasati are not steps at all, that they are, let us say, there are things that are for beginners to do, or things to do in the beginning, and then there are things to be done later in the practice, but that they are not at the level where people think of it in the sense of the Satipatthana. The Satipatthana or the 4 foundations of mindfulness is something that you are. It is a way of looking at an individual or a human being, that everybody's got a body, everybody's got feelings, everybody's got a mind, and everybody uses that mind and puts things in it, and they fall out, and you put more things in, and sometimes they get stirred around. But the point is that you cannot, for instance, sit down in meditation and not have all 4 of those things from the very first breath and all throughout the entire hour, or ever how long you're going to be practicing meditation. All 4 of those things are going to be there, and therefore all 4 of them need to be dealt with. But that each one of them can be dealt with only according to the skill level. But that practicing Anapanasati in the sense of staying only with the body for the long period of time is not advisable. That in fact we need to bring in other aspects of the practice, because we have feelings come up. We have a mind to work with. In fact, part of the job of Anapanasati is to, in fact, investigate this mind, to see what it is, to find out how it puts things in, how they stay, how they remain, or how you can drive things out of the mind. A lot of people, in fact, first off, they have the idea, or they have the surface level thought, that my thoughts are my thoughts and my thoughts are good thoughts. But at a lower level, what they really mean is that I am my thoughts, or that my thoughts actually are me, or better still, my thoughts control me, my thoughts define who I am. And that's very similar to like somebody who buys a house and they think they're a house owner, and what they really are in is that the house owns them. They're responsible for taking care of that house. They're responsible for making the payments on it. They're responsible for it. And in fact, the house in that way owns them, in the same way that our thoughts begin to own us. And so these are things that we really need to start working with at that level of the very beginning. And how we see that is that as we begin to breathe and watch the breath, we have a very simple job to do. Step 1 of Anapanasati is as I breathe in, I know I am breathing in. And as I breathe out, I know I'm breathing out. And that's really all that's necessary, except for perhaps the quality of breath. As I'm breathing in a deep, long breath, I know that this is a deep, long one. And as I breathe out, it's a deep, long breath that I'm breathing out, or a shallow breath. That's a very simple thing to do. And yet it becomes extraordinarily difficult because the mind wanders away, as minds tend to do. Within the computers, in fact, a computer couldn't function correctly if it didn't have what's called interrupts. In other words, if you go and tell the hard drive to read something, and when you're finished reading it in, let me know. When the job is finished, the interrupt happens saying your data has arrived. So our whole lives are, in fact, interrupts. All of your emails are interrupts. But another way of looking at it is all of our thoughts are interrupts also. That in fact, if our job and our intention is to watch the breath, and the mind wanders away from watching the breath, that means that we're just in a normal function of handling interrupts.
All right.
Except that when we finish one interrupt, then we've got another interrupt and another interrupt and another interrupt, and we never really get back to the job at hand is watching the breath. And so when people do come back to watch the breath, they will do so with the quality of, oh, this is a monkey mind, oh, this is a very difficult process, oh, I'm not a good meditator, and many doubts will kind of arise. What the students at that level don't understand is that these doubts that are arising is actually part of the problem, part of the hindrances of the mind that need to be seen. We need to see what it is that brings the mind away from the breath, and then start again, come back to the breath, but we come back to the breath happily. In fact, we can catch the mind wandering away with the thought of, aha, I caught you. So when we're studying Anapanasati formally, we find out that this is actually step 10 of Anapanasati out of 16 steps is to gladden the mind, or to actually experience the mind. If the mind wanders away from the breath, and we see that the mind has run away from the breath, and we can bring it back to the breath, that in fact is experiencing the mind, which is step 9. Aha, I caught you. The mind is not in fact who I am. I am not in
Okay.
charge of the mind. My thoughts are in fact not my thoughts. I can't control them yet. Maybe someday I will be able to control them, but not now. Many people in fact are very confused at that point, have a lot of doubt, because they're beginning to see for themselves for the first time that the mind in fact is not what they thought it was. Now that they investigate what the mind is, they see that it's different from what they assumed. That doesn't make it bad, and it doesn't make it good, but normally the way that the mind works is that, oh, I was wrong, therefore that's not good. I should in fact take a different look at it and make sure that I was right in the first place, because I don't like to feel wrong. I want to feel right all the time. This is the way. And so people will come into conflict with this, thinking that their mind is in fact not what they had expected it to be. And then, in fact, the more we delve, the more we look, and the more we research, we find out that the mind is not at all what we thought that it was going to be. That consciousness is not what we thought it would be. That consciousness is, in fact, not a stream or a flow the way that a river is. That it's more like drops. A drop here, a drop there. We have eye consciousness, we have ear consciousness, and it moves back and forth. And that we don't see that there's gaps between until we really start taking a look at what's going on. And so all of the stages of Anapanasati need to be practiced all at the same time, according to what needs to be done in this particular moment. Okay, so some
Okay.
students will have the idea, well, should I do this or should I do that? In the sense of, I'm going to be spending the next few months or years doing this as opposed to doing that. No, maybe you spend a minute or two on this and then a minute or two on that, or maybe even 10 seconds on this and then 10 seconds on that, because the mind is kind of like a monkey mind. But now we're beginning to direct it. And where we want to direct it to is to keep it within this framework of the Satipatthana, most specifically within the framework of the Anapanasati 16 steps for each of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. If there
Right.
is in fact one step that's more important than any of the others, I would say that it would be step 13. Because step 13 is the stage where we begin to see that everything is temporary. The breath is temporary. It goes in for a little while, then it stops for a little while, then it goes out for a little while, and then it stops for a while. The breath is temporary. The contents of the mind are temporary. In fact, the condition of the mind is temporary. Our feelings are temporary. Everything is in constant flux. Everything is in motion. And that the best that we can do is to start to recognize how things are in flux. That in fact, as we're beginning to see how things are in flux, that brings us more and more back into the present moment. There's only 2 permanent things in the world. That's the past and the future. Everything else is temporary. Nothing lasts. And in fact, the past really is not permanent. We just kind of hope or wish or thought it was. But in fact, every time a new history book is written, the past is changed.
Yeah.
Every time a new prediction is made, the future changes. But we kind of think of it like that, but in fact, the future will never be here. The past is already gone and there's nothing that can be done about it. Where we really learn to live our lives is in this present moment. And that the practice of Anapanasati is the practice to bring us into this present moment, not just the breath, but the mind, the feelings, the body, the contents of the mind, everything. We bring it into this moment to let it be here now. So, as I said, the Anapanasati Sutta also has the quality of things that should be done in the beginning of the practice and then things that should be done later in the practice. For instance, in the 4 foundations of mindfulness for the body, we have the first steps, 1, 2, 3, 4. The first step is, as I breathe in long, I understand I'm breathing in long, and as I breathe out long, I understand I'm breathing out long. The second one is, as I breathe in short, I understand I'm breathing in short, and as I breathe out short, I understand that I'm breathing out short. Very, very simple thing. The next part is that as I breathe in, I will understand the body. As I breathe out, I will understand the body. Now, a lot of people, let us say, there is one group of people called the Goenka students who do a particular body scan for this third step of Anapanasati. But the Buddha didn't talk about body scans, but what he did talk about was, as the body is in postures and as it moves, to be fully comprehending what the body is doing. As the hand moves out and stretches, that we recognize that. As we draw the hand back, as we eat our food, as we walk, that everything becomes kind of a meditation because we're constantly watching what the body's doing. We become very familiar with the body. Another way of looking at it would be that there are certain aspects of the body that are more important than others. For instance, the thighs and the knees and that kind of stuff are not really important, but the hands are really important. Another way of looking at it is that in fact the breath body is important, and especially in the sense of the belly, the chest, the throat, through the neck up to the nostrils, to become very familiar with the body as it's breathing in and breathing out. And the way, in fact, that we become very familiar with the body as it's breathing in and out and become experiencing the body is by feeling it. Then, in fact, if you had no feelings at all and you closed your eyes and the body was breathing in and out, you wouldn't know it. Why? Because you couldn't feel it. You got no feelings. The way you know your body is through feelings. And so we immediately start bringing feelings into the situation in order to experience the body. So even though we're working in the body with step 3, we're actually practicing the second foundation of mindfulness, which would be step 5, 6, 7, and 8. But in order to practice steps number 5, 6 correctly, we need to actually practice parts of the mind to be able to see the mind as it's in action and to gladden the mind. If we can gladden the mind, then the body will start to feel good. That we already know that there's a connection between the body and the mind. But eventually we also see the reverse direction, which is when we see how the feelings themselves condition the mind. That the mind is conditioned by feelings. And that's, fairly easy to see if somebody is, many examples of it. If somebody gets injured, then they can't think straight. That the body will, in fact, go into shock if it's injured badly. Or if somebody has a headache, they can't think straight. Or if somebody is angry and full of feelings that way, then they will make choices that they wouldn't make if they were feeling at a different way. And so we begin to see how the feelings themselves condition the mind as well as the mind conditioning the feelings, that these things are really interrelated, and how the mind conditioning the feelings also condition our experience of the body. And so this, even though we've broken it out and called it the Satipatthana, we begin to start seeing how it's really quite integrated, that it's just looking at the same thing like looking into the same house through 4 different windows. So the higher practice then would be the of the four tetrads would be each of the uh, four foundations broken into half. So step 1 and 2 would be a beginning practice. Step 3 and 4 would be a later practice. Step 5 and 6 would be an early practice. Step 7 and 8 would be a later practice. Step 9 and 10 would be an early practice. Step 11 and 12 would be later practice. Now, step 11 and 12 are actually what we mean by concentrating the mind. But when we concentrate the mind here, we're not talking about very tight concentration of jhana, but rather we're talking about right noble concentration, which is where the mind is open and free. And so that then step number 12 would be freeing the mind to let it become completely free in the sense of empty or unbounded.
Right.
All right, and then the fourth tetrad of seeing everything as temporary and fading away would be an early practice, and then step 15 and 16, which would be cessation and relinquishment, would be kind of the final practice. That in fact, relinquishment has an important quality to it, because relinquishment has to go hand in hand uh, over a period of time. An example of that would be like if you decided that you, even though you loved your car very much, that you had to sell the car. Okay, when you decided to sell it, that would be one kind of relinquishment. Then, as you start to advertise the sale of the car, that's a different kind of relinquishment, but it's a deeper kind. Then you actually sell the car and make a deal with somebody, and that's a deeper relinquishment. And then the guy drives away in your car, and that's when you have to finally say goodbye. So this relinquishment quality is also a process, but it's like a higher process that we go through. In fact, you could say the relinquishment is also the same thing as the deliverance. The
Right.
deliverance and relinquishments are precisely the same thing, just looking at it from a different perspective. I see you've got a child climbing on your head.
Yep.
All right. So now that we've covered the Satipatthana and the Anapanasati, we need to spend some more time on the Dhammanupassana, or the fourth aspect, which is the mental contents. Now, as one practices and becomes more familiar with both the practice and the theories of the teaching of the Buddha, the quality of the things, the objects of the mind, will begin to change.
Right.
And that in the beginning, we are working with the eradication of the hindrances, or those things which keep us from being able to see clearly. Thoughts about the things we want, the thoughts about the things we don't like, the doubts that we have about the practice, general worries, or thoughts about the past and the future. Anything that hinders us, including being very sleepy or even bored with the practice,
All right.
are hindrances. And so these 5 hindrances is what we need in the beginning to remove. And we can do that basically also with seeing how temporary they are. Oh, here it comes and there it goes. Anything that comes into the mind can be thrown out of the mind. A lot of people don't understand this. They think that once they're dwelling on something, let us say that somebody's having trouble sleeping at night because they're worried about the job the next morning, the work that they
Okay.
have to do. While they're laying in bed, all they're doing is wearing their mind out and getting more and more tired. They're not actually coming to any resolution. They're just thinking about the same thing that they've got to do tomorrow over and over again.
Yeah, I've experienced that before.
You've ever done that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And what we don't realize at that moment is that we don't have to think those thoughts. That we're strong, we can throw things out of the mind so that we can get some peace and quiet. That we can actually enjoy our time in bed, and we don't have to spend it in let us say worrying about the future or worrying about the past. That we need to be able to see these things. This is what the real quality of seeing the mind for itself, and recognize that all of these contents are merely temporary. They can fade away. They can be pushed out. Go ahead. You
Right.
have a
So,
question.
yeah, like removing one of the hindrances, it kind of explains that it's like plucking it out or removing the hindrance. Removing the hindrance, would that just be noticing the hindrance and then deciding not to give in to the hindrance and be mindful? Is that what you do? Yeah.
Yes, exactly so.
Yeah.
If you've had an argument with somebody and then later you realize that you're rehashing that argument in your mind, you can say, I don't have to think those thoughts about that. I can throw that out completely. Or you can even
Right.
go so far as to think, hey, I really like that guy, and there's really a lot of good stuff that I like about him, and I don't have to keep thinking about this argument. I can let it go.
And also, say about 90 or 95% of the hindrances will be in thought form, right?
Will be what?
They'll be in thought form.
I don't understand.
They will uh, they will arise in the form of a thought.
Oh, you mean words?
No, they'll either be mental. They'll be mental thoughts.
Talk. Yes, talk.
No, thoughts like as in mental thoughts.
Can you spell the word? I'm having trouble getting it.
THOUGHTS.
Thought. Thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh. Right. Thought normally has two different qualities to it. It has visualization and it has language. You could almost think about it in the sense of an internal television set. And normally how we use that is that we'll have an image that sort of rings our bell, and then we'll talk about it, which is sort of like the ringing of the bell after it's struck.
Right.
Um, some people can think just purely in mental imagery. Other people will think mostly in just thought, but in the sense of just language. But if you start to study your own mind, you'll begin to see that there's a combination generally. There's generally a picture or a thought, this a visual thought followed by uh, quite a lot of verbal thought. And in fact, an image can get struck, and then there'll be 2 or 3 minutes of verbal thought.
Yeah, I suppose they can be in unison with each other, like feelings and thoughts. They can be, combined together in
Yes,
unison. Yeah.
exactly so. That ever how we're feeling, that will certainly influence what thoughts we have. Now, a lot of people will actually think that, oh, well, I think what I want to think. No, you think according to the habit patterns of the mind. How you were thinking years ago affects how you think now, is generally
Your
what happens with people.
your
That they,
your old mind maps.
right, that we don't find new ways of thinking. Basically, Anapanasati is uh, learning about new ways of thinking. And that the first thing that we have to do is learn how to uh, empty the mind of the past and future, and to bring the mind to this present moment. That's the very first uh, big accomplishment that needs to be done. Um, when the mind is free from hindrances, uh, that means that it's more fit for work. But to make it completely fit for work means that you also have to gladden the mind, or to make it, let us say, happy, or uh, investigative. That we have
Right.
have a happy desire or a want.
Can you hear any background noise?
Pardon?
Can you hear any background noise?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of background noise.
Sophia, use your iPhone in the bedroom. Turn it off. Just lower it down because I'm going to be finished here in a while. Lower it down all the way. Just look at the iPhone or something because I have to put this on YouTube. I have to put this on YouTube. All right. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So, when we're talking about the contents of the mind, these things can be changed, and that the first thing that we want to learn is how to remove the hindrances so that we can get the mind in a state of fit for work. When the mind is when we add the gladdening of the mind, then the mind is really fit for work. Here's an example of that. And by the way, as we're talking about this, we're talking about entrance into what's called the first jhana, which is the place where all the real work is going to be done. The first jhana is very much like reading a book that we're very, very interested in. You have read books before that you were not interested in, but found some reason to have your eyes passing over the words, and you found that at the end of the page or even at the end of the paragraph, you don't know what you've been reading because you've been thinking about something else. As
Right.
opposed to when you're really, really interested in something, then when you're reading it, you're gaining the content out of that reading it, and you know that you're getting it as you go through sentence by sentence, that you understand and comprehend what you're reading as you go along. Okay, this is very much like the mind fit for work within the Buddhist context. Many meditators will sit down and meditate the way that they read the book that they're only half interested in. What we need to do is we need to become extremely interested in watching the breath, extremely interested in watching the mind, extremely focused on, with great joy, about what the mind is doing. And when the mind wanders away, where does it go? What does it do? Okay, and so we began to build up this sort of underground or background habit of being very curious about what the mind is doing.
Okay.
If we can draw another analogy, you could go so far as to say that then what is the second jhana is when the mind becomes so focused that it can't even read a book. And an example of that would be like a race car driver that's doing Formula One at, going around hairpin curves at high speeds and on the thoroughfares up to 200 miles an hour. In order to do that, the race car driver has to stay extremely focused. He's also filled with feeling. The gravitational and acceleration forces of that car have him in a complete state of at oneness with that automobile. He becomes the car in a way, and that if he starts thinking about Aunt Matilda, or if he start thinking about the argument that he had with his wife, he's not going to come out of that hairpin turn alive. He's got to stay focused on what he's doing. Okay, this is more like what the second jhana is, except that the kind of focus that we're wanting is not that kind of focus. What we're looking for instead in the first jhana is the ability to read the mind the way that we read a book. So we want the kind of thoughts that can see clearly and then do a conversation about it that understands it, but we're not talking about the past and present. We're talking about this moment, about what's happening in the mind, to discover the mind, to discover the temporariness, to discover and to map out what our hindrances are so that we can begin to understand that these hindrances are very much like the elephant in the room. And that many people, their whole mind is crowded with a particular event and they're trying to do something else and they can't because this elephant is taking up all of their mental space. They need to find that elephant and throw it out.
Is it possible that you could give me an example of how exaggerated the breath should be when you're gladdening or when you're practicing Anapanasati?
Yes, when you can say, "Ah, the mind has wandered away. Never mind. Start again with a great big smile. As I breathe in joy. As I breathe out joy. Oh, I can relax,
And
relax."
those breaths would be extremely exaggerated, right?
They can be. Actually, it's important to exaggerate the first few breaths because that helps really focus the mind.
Okay, so after about 6 to 10 very deep breaths, it's okay to settle down into a shallow breath.
Yes, yes, exactly
Okay.
so. But if you can, continue also to enjoy those more normal breaths as
Okay.
you breathe in those. That in fact, one of the, and I know that this is hypnotic suggestion, but hypnotic suggestion works. And so it also with the placebo effect. You would go so far as to say that you can give Christians this same thing. As they breathe in the Holy Spirit. As they breathe in God. And they'll probably get more joy out of it than your average atheist will, who's just breathing in ordinary joy, you see. They can get the really good stuff. But it's all mental again. So whatever you can do to really bring that joy on, do that. You can
Okay.
do that with remembering things happened long ago that were really, really wonderful for you. Things that made you really joyful. And you can bring up that joy again as you remember it, and then you can recreate that joy for this moment.
Now, I actually like when I notice that I'm not bored, when I'm sitting in meditation and I notice that I'm not bored and I feel comfortable. That kind of makes me feel like I'm bringing on gladdening the breath.
Yes, yes. It's a tip of the scale in the right direction, but just recognize that that's also just like on a scale from 1 to 10, you have moved from a 4 to a 5, and now you're at neutral or maybe 5.5. There's a 10 up there for you someplace.
Right.
That's right. That you can create this joy. You can bring it on. Then, in fact, when it's full on, it becomes what they call rapturous in the sense that big bodily sensations will occur. The hair on your arms will stand up. The hair on the back of your neck will stand up. Tingling sensations will come up through the legs into the body. Um, the Kundalini will arise in the sense that you'll feel big exaggerations coming up the backbone. Um, so all kinds of things. Some students will even feel like they're being knocked over by like a wave of the ocean when the big feelings arise. But these also are just temporary feelings. They pass away, nothing important. But you should note them well, and also note that these feelings are something that you can experience and learn to control. Most people, they have the idea that their happiness is going to be coming from the outside world, especially since the entire world of big business has been using and abusing psychology for the past 100 years to try to trap people into believing that your happiness depends upon you buying what they have to sell,
Right.
which is a form of materialism. It is, in fact, materialism at its sort of most insidious point. But now that you're beginning to practice this joy and you're beginning to experience this joy in the body, you begin to understand that you're in control of your own joy. You do not get your happiness from buying things. That those are, in fact, very dangerous. That they don't bring the happiness we're expecting them to bring, but then when we lose it, then we feel even worse.
Okay.
So, by beginning to see that our feelings are not only a natural process, but that we can feel differently than the way that we used to feel, that we can think differently than the way that we used to think, that we can come out of the old habits that cause us suffering and come into a new set of habits that are not suffering, that we can be delivered from this suffering through knowledge and vision. But so long as we have magical beliefs, then this will not occur. This is one of the major distinctions between the teaching of the Buddha and the teachings of other religions, is that they say that your salvation and your happiness is dependent upon something on the outside of you. Taking Jesus as your Savior and He will save you, or blowing yourself up in a martyr will get you 72 virgins in paradise, or whatever the Muslims are teaching this week. And that the all of these things are actually part of the business world, part of the business community. In fact, organized religion is a business, and its business is to sell you something and get you to pay for it, to keep the business going, right? They want your tithe money, they want this, they want that, and the other thing. But what they're selling, people, they may buy it, but they don't apply it. They don't get any real good benefit out of it. That really where your benefits are going to come is by practicing a method that is going to allow you to gain control over the way that you feel, to gain control over the way that you think, so that you are no longer subject to materialism. That in fact, there becomes, the Buddha talks about it in this regard, that there are four modes of clinging. There's four methods of clinging. The most difficult to deal with and the most profound, but the one that we have to deal with first, is called the doctrine of self. The second one is clinging to sensual desire, which is again materialism, which is what I was just talking about, that we think that we get our pleasure from sensuality, from materialism, from buying things. And in fact, that may not be the case at all. A great deal of suffering can come from attachment to sensual things. The next one is attachments to rites, rules, and rituals, especially religious rituals, or thinking that if we do this, it's like making some sort of deal with fate or deal with reality. A lot of students, in fact, will think that they can sit down on a cushion and meditate, or at least pretend to meditate, and then get some value out of it. Or do a 10-day course and say, oh, I'm better now that I've taken a 10-day course. Actually, the course or the meditation didn't do anything for them, but if they were, in fact, investigating the mind, then while they were, that was beneficial for them, and they didn't have to take that meditation course in order to do that. Okay, so these rites, rules, rituals, formulas, practices, celebrations, none of those things are going to get you out of suffering. That only a change in the mental ways of dealing with things. An example of that would be the positive ceremonies that we have that we think are going to be some value. A historical example of that is marriage, to where the two people will stand and they'll have a big ceremony and they'll pay a lot of money and they'll get a preacher or a priest or whatever, and they'll take their vows saying that I will be with you always. And 5 years later, no, sorry, changed my mind. Okay, that alone proves that the marriage ceremony doesn't work. No ceremonies work. No religious ceremonies work. Those people, the Catholics will do a baptism at birth, and the Baptists, they want to wait until the kid's 9, 10, 15 years old or something. But a baptism doesn't do anything. What does something is the change of attitude. Now, some people can go through a change of attitude at a ceremony, but the ceremony didn't make that change of attitude happen. The attitude change was different and was on its own. So in that regard, keeping rituals are of no value.
Okay.
And so therefore, keeping rituals and thinking that they have value is a form of suffering, is a form of lying to ourselves. The same thing is true about negative rules. That we think that, oh, if we behave this way, that we can keep ourselves out of danger. And yet we now understand that many, many people on death row in the United States were innocent. They didn't do what they were put in jail for. That in fact, mostly we begin to understand that the police are probably as corrupt as any of the people that they're hired to capture. That the human mind is the human mind, and that making a bunch of rules about how people should behave actually causes more trouble than it fixes.
Right.
And so we become free and unbound from rites, rules, and rituals. The same thing is true, and in fact, the biggest one in that regard of expanse is our belief systems. That anything that we do not know for sure because we haven't investigated it is just a belief. For instance, you and I just believe that the polar ice caps are melting. We haven't been to the polar region to see for ourselves if the ice caps are melting.
Okay.
We don't know these things. These are just beliefs. Most religion is nothing but a set of beliefs. But if we start living our lives as if we know what we know because we know it, and that anything that we don't know because we haven't got a direct experience for it, we don't need to hold that as a belief.
Right.
Okay? And so when I talk to people about, for instance, creationism versus evolution, well, I can say, well, clearly the creationists, they don't have any evidence at all, that their position is absolutely ridiculous. And then they say, well, what about the scientists? I say, well, I'm not a scientist that's working with evolution. You should go talk to the scientists that do. They can
Right.
give you the data that they have, that I don't have to take a position on it. I don't have to take a position on creationism other than to see how absurd it is to have a position that has no facts. But I don't have to hold anything for evolution either, because the facts about evolution will stand on their own. They don't need my help.
Right.
And this is true about any particular conflict. The evidence itself will be enough for a particular position. If we don't have any evidence, there's no reason to hold that position. And if we do have evidence, there's no reason to hold on to it either, because the evidence itself is enough.
Okay.
Okay. So by giving up on these four modes of clinging, the clinging to the self, clinging to a doctrine of self, clinging to sensual or materialism, clinging to rites, rules, and rituals, and clinging to views are the four modes of clinging. Those are the only ways of clinging. If we can come out of those four modes of clinging, then we've come into a state of deliverance.
Right.
That in fact, these are the four things that we're going to be delivered from. Now, when we talk about a doctrine of self, we have to understand that all four of these things have a self into it. That you can't cling to a view unless there's a you to cling to that view. You can't cling to a rite, rules, and rituals unless there's a you that's clinging to it. You can't own a car unless there's a you that owns the car. Okay? It takes both. In other words, every stick has two ends to it. You can cut it in half, but then whatever new sticks you come up, they have an end to it. But the important one at that level is the doctrine of self. When we talk about, we're not talking about it in the self of just a self, but we're talking about it in the sense of a doctrine of self or a teaching of self.
Okay.
A religion needs a doctrine of self, even if the religion doesn't teach about the doctrine of self at all. It talks about all the other stuff in that religion, but it never talks about the doctrine of self. But still, the doctrine of self is absolutely essential. For instance, Christians believe in heaven, but if there was no souls to go to heaven, if you had no soul to go to heaven, then that heaven becomes kind of irrelevant.
Okay.
The same thing is true for a hell. If there was a hell, but there was no soul for you to go to that hell, then that hell would become irrelevant.
Right.
Okay, so religion without a doctrine of self becomes irrelevant. Gods become irrelevant unless the God has, let us say, these human playthings, and that we're one of these playthings. If we were not a plaything of the God, then the God becomes irrelevant.
Right.
This is what we mean by the doctrine of self. If there is no doctrine of self, if there's no teaching about a soul that goes after one dies, then any teachings about that become irrelevant. Not that whether they're true or not, but that they are actually irrelevant. That's a more important point. In other words, we don't have to consider whether they're true or not because their irrelevancy is already established.
Okay.
All right. But in a scientific way, we can look at the self in the sense of if there's going to be a mass death, then whatever that religion teaches about all of those people who have died, it has to be able to separate them out. For instance, when the bomb dropped in World War II on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, 100,000 people died. How does each of those religions of each of those people determine who was who, since everybody was sort of blown into oblivion?
Right.
Well, we know from particle physics that all the particles are temporary. That even if you have a water molecule and you've had water in the ocean for millions of years, but if you take one of those water molecules out of the ocean and you divide that up through electrolysis, how do you know that the original electrons from that oxygen atom are going to be the same electrons that it started with when it ends up after it's being separated, or did it get, in fact, one of the electrons from the
Stuff.
from the hydrogen?
Yeah.
In other words, everything at that level is temporary. Nothing change. Nothing is established, and not only that, but nothing is identifiable. That every
Right.
electron is indistinguishable from any other electrons. You take that up a level from particle physics into, let us say, elementary chemistry. That at the chemical level, there is still no identification of a ferrous oxide molecule from any other ferrous oxide molecule, and that we know that that ferrous oxide can become ferrite oxide by adding a little more iron to it. So at that level, everything is temporary. If you go up to the biological level, at the level of amino acids, all amino acids are also temporary. DNA is temporary. Nothing at this level is going to be to identify a self or a soul. So when the body is destroyed, everything in that body is destroyed that could have been any identification for you. So and it's got to be at least as complicated as, say, a telephone number. Because
Right.
why? Because there's 7 or 8 billion people. So it's got to have a 7 or 8 digit number in there someplace to identify each one of the souls. The fact that that kind of physics doesn't exist should be enough for us to understand that at that level there is no soul. We've got that kind of wired through physics. We understand at that level that that kind of soul cannot exist. So that destroys the doctrine of self, that kind of self is not existent. What kind of self does exist? This is the kind of thing then that needs to be investigated. When a self arises, what is it that arises? Is it temporary or is it permanent? Well, we've already established that it's not totally permanent, that it's got to be something that arises. In fact, what we come to understand is that each person doesn't spend a lot of time in selfishness, but it's only when the mind is in a particular situation that we're in fact clinging to one of these four modes of clinging. If you're just sitting comfortably and you're not thinking about any rules, you're not thinking about anything that you want, if you're not thinking about any belief systems that you have, that if you're just sitting there calmly and quietly, then there is no self. The
Okay.
self can only come through these four modes of clinging. But when it does come up, we know it because it's painful.
How about the personality is temporary, right?
The personality is also temporary. That in fact they've come to understand that because of the way that the mind works, that some people can have more than one personality.
Right.
That one personality can be there to protect the normal personality, because a normal personality is like a little girl, a child, a vulnerable person. So they'll have an alter ego or something that's a big, tough karate girl. They could beat the whoopings out of anybody, but that one doesn't come out often. That in fact, if you think about it that way, everybody is multiple personality.
Right.
That the personality changes. Not only does it change over time, but it can change over the course of a day. Your personality has changed, in fact, because you're now a dog or a pony or something. Because you've got somebody riding on your back.
Right.
And so that affects things. So in that regard, the personality is temporary.
But the temporary self is the personality. But rather than think of it as a temporary self, one should think about it as lots of different types of conditions put together into a set, right? Like,
Yes, in fact, you could think of it like this, is that if you want to talk about a basic personality or the most consistent aspect of a personality, you can think about it as a sense of the habits that we have formed. Or another way of thinking about it is the old maps. You see, in childhood, in early childhood development, the children have to learn to generalize or categorize or put things into particular categories. And that by doing so, this is how we make mental maps. And so, what is a man and what is a woman is a mental map that each person carries around. And some people who have different feelings as a child will have a different understanding of what it is to be a man or a woman than someone else.
right,
Okay, so our maps that we build up have to do with things like what is dangerous or what is not dangerous. So one child who has an uncle that is let us say poorly dressed and scruffy, but he is really kind to her, then she will see all old men scruffy like that as being really kind to old men. To where another girl who has an uncle who is scruffy, but he's very mean to her, then when she grows up, all of the old scruffy men will be mean. Okay, this is how we generalize things. And we
right,
generalize them even into the point of like government. There's really no such thing as a government. The United States government really doesn't exist except in the minds of many, many tens of thousands of millions of people. What there is a lot of property, there's a lot of buildings, there's a lot of people going and sitting in those buildings and moving paper around all day. But that's all it is. There is no real one thing called the government, and yet many people in the United States still hate the government. They don't even know what it is that they hate.
Yeah.
Because they're overgeneralizing. So as we begin to think about what the mind really is, we begin to recognize that much of what my mind has been overgeneralizing things based upon decisions and choices I made when I was too young to make those kind of choices. I didn't have
Right.
enough information. Okay, so really what enlightenment is to open up to see how things really are, rather than how we imagined that they were when we were really little, when we were young, when we were making decisions about life that were too complicated for us to make really wise decisions about them.
So if one comes to knowledge and deliverance, will the feeling of consciousness feel like a higher state of consciousness?
No, what it will be when you begin to see it is that you'll see it as being intermittent. That is not a stream, that it comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. You watch it arise. One of the qualities of one of the very high jhanas is for the mind to get into such a deep level of inspection so that we can see how this consciousness is constantly arising and passing away.
All right.
But you don't need that. You can, in fact, begin to just, you can look out the window and you begin to see that I'm looking at that, now I'm looking at this one, now I'm looking at that, and that every time that you look at a different item through your window, the consciousness will change. It's a different consciousness as it arises. And then somebody will come in the room behind you and you'll hear something and you'll recognize, oh, that's a different kind of consciousness. That's ear consciousness now. I've heard something. And a lot of this stuff is happening very, very fast, but you're paying attention. The more attention you pay to it, the more you'll recognize exactly what is going on. But when we're not paying attention to it, then we kind of see things as steady state or kind of permanent. An example of that would be a river. There's an ancient Greek philosopher called Herodotus who made the statement, you can't step in the same river twice.
Okay.
Do you know what he meant by that?
No.
Well, at a gross level, the river is the same. You put your foot into it, you take it out, you put it into it again. Well, the second time you put it into it, it may get hit by a log. It's not the same river as when you put your foot in it the first time. Okay, or you put your foot into it a second or a third time, and this time it might get bitten by a snake. Now the snake is a river snake, or a snake river. It's not a log river. Okay,
Well,
the river keeps changing. It's not the same river as it was before.
What you were saying earlier about noticing the different consciousness, how would you experience that? Through volitional, or would it be through, you'd have a feeling, a different feeling?
No, it would be experiential.
All right.
It would almost, if you had a word to put with it, it would be ah, or aha.
Like a knowing.
A knowing, exactly. A seeing, a picking up, or a witnessing. That would be the experience of it.
All right.
A recognition that it's temporary, a recognition that it's not what you thought it was, that it's not magical. You see, the Hindus have the idea that consciousness is that which is born and dies and goes from life to life and experiences here and now the actions from past lives. And this,
Okay.
and that the Buddha taught directly against that. No, your consciousness is not that. Your consciousness is temporary. In fact, he uses the word I consciousness the way that you would use the word for fire, in the sense of a fire by its fuel. So a log fire would be a fire that's fueled by logs, or a grass fire, or a gas fire. So also consciousness is known by eye consciousness, or ear consciousness, or thought consciousness, or whatever like this, that we become aware, or we bring into our focus of that which we used to think of as a river, or just it keeps streaming and streaming like that. But when you think about the river as streaming like that, then we're overgeneralizing the river.
Right.
But when we start inspecting things on a moment by moment by moment basis, then we begin to see that, there is a flow, there is a flood, but that flood is all separate little items. All of this river is nothing but a drop of water times a billion.
Right.
It's just a drop, a drop, a drop. That's all there. Okay. So the stream of your consciousness that's given you life for these past 35 years is not a river, but it's just one little drop at a time. That's what we begin to understand about consciousness, is that it's not the river or the stream of me, but it's more of I'm here, I'm not here, here I am, there I go, up, down, like that. That it's just things that occur. And we begin to see this as we delve deeply more into watching the mind as it arises. And the clue will be for watching the breath. So as the mind wanders away from the breath, that will be the point to notice, to get further and further back to that point. Here's what I mean by that: that when a student is just beginning to meditate, they will meditate, and maybe 5 or 6 times they'll recognize that the mind has wandered away. Well, that means that the mind might have wandered away for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and they didn't catch it. But as they begin to get experience at it, when the mind wanders away, they'll catch it quicker. And so they will begin to catch the mind wandering away maybe 30, 40, 50 times during their meditation session. And they'll say, "Oh, monkey mind, I can't meditate. Oh, I can't meditate at all today. Look how monkey mind, I can't think of it." No, actually, you're making good progress. You're making really, really good progress. Why? Because you're catching the mind wandering away earlier and earlier. You're gaining real advantage in your practice by recognizing this. But most people will go then into a funk or a depression over this, thinking that, this is just a monkey mind and I can't meditate, rather than seeing the real benefit. That's where the gladdening comes in. Aha, I caught you, I catch you. Aha, there's the mind again. Let me inspect, let me take a look at it. Very much like reading a book, a page turner, and all of a sudden you turn the page and somebody gets shot. And then, oh, what happened? Now I can really take a look at what's going on. So this is the kind of way that we want to approach meditation, as if we are in a happy investigation, looking for something, a diagnosis, this, by the way, is exactly, I'll use the example of repairing a PC. Most of the time when people have a PC, they don't know much about it, but when it's broken, they know it's broken, and they'll start to have a lot of bad feelings. And they'll immediately think, oh, I need a technician for this. And so they take it to the technician. The technician, he doesn't feel bad. He's the one who's actually curious. He wants to know what's wrong with this machine. He tears into it. He finds out where all the screw holes are, and he happily takes the thing apart, and that he really knows what he's doing because he's done it before, and so he can happily repair that PC
Right.
Okay, this is the way that we need to start approaching our meditation, as if we've had a PC that's all of a sudden newly malfunctioning. A thought has arisen, a hindrance is there. Let's see what we can do to get rid of that thing. And so we actually begin to get skilled. The bigger skill is not actually recognizing the hindrance. The bigger skill is throwing the hindrance out. Once we see that there are hindrances there, getting it out of the mind, that's the hard part, but that's also the relief. So
Right.
in Sutta number 39, the one who's actually talking about the hindrances in somewhat detail, the Buddha gives 5 examples of what it's like to be free from the hindrances. Now, even though there's 5 hindrances and even though there's 5 examples, you can't match them 1-to-1 exactly, but some people have tried. I've tried it myself. I won't do that with you. I'll let you figure that out yourself. But the 5 examples are this. One is that you're sick, like in the hospital, and then you get better. Another one is like you're in debt and you owe a lot of money. But then you sell your product or whatever, and you not only get out of debt, but now you've got enough money to feed your family for a while, and you've got a profit. Okay? Which is the better experience, to be in debt or to be debt-free? Which is the better
That's free.
experience, is to be sick or to be well, to be better?
Well,
The third one is that that you've got a job, and you got to go to work every day, and you got to go do what you're told to do. And then you quit your job and you don't have to work, or maybe you're a slave and you're freed. It's the same position.
you win the lottery.
And now you can go and do where you want to go. Another example is being in prison and getting out of jail. And the last one, and probably the best one, is that you're crossing a desert with everything you own. You're a big merchant and you've got a whole caravan full of stuff, and it's hot and it's dry and it's dangerous out there on the desert highway. But then you finally reach home, and that you're safe and you're sound, and all of your valuables and possessions are safe and sound with you. Okay?
It's like big experiences of being relieved.
Yes, right. All of these have the quality of being relieved. And so
Yeah.
this is the quality that we have for being a mind free from hindrances, is the mind that's free, that is relieved from thinking about the past or dwelling on the past, relieved from doubts and worries, relieved from wanting things that we don't have, relieved from being angry or upset or hurt or in pain over something. This is the quality of being free from hindrances, is in a state of relief, rest, relaxation. This is the quality that we're looking for. And
Okay.
when we come to that state of relief, plus the joy and the joy, by the way, comes from 2 places. One is the joy of the relief of being free from this, but also the joy comes from the satisfaction of having overcome the adversity. So when you cross that desert and you get to a safe place, then you feel satisfied that you were actually able to cross the desert. When you get out of jail, then you have the satisfaction that I was able to manipulate my way out of jail. Okay, so it has those 2 qualities. One is that the actual freedom from it, but 2, the satisfaction of gaining that freedom. And so these are 2 qualities of freedom, of the joy that we can experience. And with that joy, that and the mind free from the hindrances, is what makes the mind fit for work. And when it's fit for work, that's when we can begin to really understand how temporary we are, how there is no self that can be transported way off into the future so that some karma machine out there can grab a hold of me and make me live another life that I don't particularly want to live because of my past bad deeds. We don't have to worry about that kind of stuff, that we can truly be here now. In fact, the whole quality of a religion that teaches heaven and hell or teaches karma is really a way of getting people stuck into the past or the future. They're worried about what's going to happen after death. They're not worried about being good now. They're worrying about be good now so I can get a reward later.
Right.
One of the biggest qualities about the teaching of the Buddha that most people don't understand is that in fact it is a moral teaching. It is much more of a moral teaching than Christianity. Christianity is not a moral teaching. If anything, Christianity is a teaching of getting out of jail free, in the sense of taking Jesus as your Savior, and He's going to forgive you for your sins, which means you've been a bad boy and you need to go to hell, but I'll do you a favor. All right, this is what it's all about. Buddhism is not like that. Buddhism is, in fact, a moral teaching in the sense that if you're going to be happy in this life, you've got to have a mind that is pure enough to contain that happiness.
Right.
That you can't go around with a mind full of unhappy, hateful thoughts and be happy. It just doesn't work like that. The mind doesn't work that way. So, in a way, that's why morality in Buddhism is taught to children. But to the children, it's taught as a moral code, as a set of rules. But in a real practice, when we're at the state of knowledge, then we recognize that our morality is not a set of rules to practice in order to gain or to be harmed by something on the outside, either other people or a common machine or a god or something like that. That in fact, if I am harming someone, I'm harming myself in that moment. That if I want to be free and happy, I've got to come out of the morality that had kept me from being happy. So while the Christians have the idea that it's okay to continue to sin because you'll get the just reward in heaven because you're forgiven of your sin, they still have to suffer the punishments of the sins that they're committing while they're still alive as Christians.
Okay.
But as Buddhists, once we've begun to understand that our morality is in fact the path to freedom,
Okay.
then our morality takes on a completely different level. Now it becomes not something that we live up to in order to get a reward later. It's much more like a ladder. It's a tool. It's a device. It's something that we need in order to gain peace of mind. That if I hate somebody, then my thoughts are going to be on hating that person, is not going to be on happiness.
Okay. I remember hearing something before about beings being born spontaneously. I think it was in reference to right view, or was it in reference to the four modes of clinging?
About what?
You know, there's a passage in this sutta that says beings that are born spontaneously.
If I came over there and grinned at you happily like I do and then slapped you in the face, there would be a new being spontaneously reborn with that slap.
Really?
Yes. However, the quality of spontaneous doesn't necessarily mean without cause. There is a teaching that I got in grade school about spontaneous combustion. You see, back in the 1930s, in the South, they would use hardwood floors in the houses that were rough sawn wood. And in order to make the floors decent, they would oil them. But when they oil the floors, they would oil them with a mop that was a rag or a cloth, and then they would take this oily cloth and put it into a closet, and the house would burn down. And they call that spontaneous combustion. When you put oily rags together, there's a combination, and that the rags themselves will keep the heat from the oil interaction with the rags, and it can smolder and actually catch a blaze. And they call this spontaneous combustion. But it wasn't spontaneous. There was a whole lot of causes that went into that. The way that the rags were piled on the floor, the way the oil interacts with the rags, it wasn't spontaneous, not real spontaneous. In fact, I don't know of anything that's truly spontaneous in the sense that it happens without cause. Another quality of spontaneous is that it happens suddenly. And yet spontaneous combustion with those rags, that was a very slow process. It might have taken all day long for those rags to finally reach the kindling temperature to where the smoldering actually caused, or the heat got to the point of reaching kindling temperature. So we have to realize that the word spontaneous doesn't really give the qualities of spontaneous. Also, we have to look at the word being to really get it. What is a being? Are you the same being that you were 4 years ago? No. You're being differently now. And so spontaneous beings arise all the time. When my family comes home, these dogs are completely different. They're spontaneously arising to be completely different dogs. Before that, they were sleeping on the floor. Now they're prancing around and their tails are wagging. And
Right.
okay, so we have to take those qualities of what they're talking about and not make it into magic. That the teaching of the Buddha is actually hidden away. That I have heard that it happened starting around 300 AD, when Brahmanism started to eat Buddhism alive, when it started to, and in fact, what you could say is they changed tactics. Before that they were just absolutely against Buddhism because Buddhism was absolutely against Brahmanism, Hinduism, in the sense of tearing down everything they said. What happened in about 300 AD was that they started to say, oh, well, Buddhism is just another one aspect of Hinduism. They started to absorb it. They started to eat it alive. And by the time the Muslims came, they were completely able to absorb it. And you'll see many, many aspects of Buddhism still left within Hindu. It's still there. And I mean, even the swamis wear the same yellow robes as Hindu priests. I mean, the Buddhist monks did so long ago. So what I'm getting at is that over the course of time, the real teaching of the Buddha became hidden away inside of what they call the Buddhist religion. And that quite a lot of suttas can be seen as to whether or not they are suttas out of the Buddhist religion or whether they're real teachings of the Buddha.
Right.
An example of that is the Paticcasamuppada Sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya is very, very easily seen to be of a much later time, and that it was derived from the a sutta on right speech that Sariputta gave, and that he maps all of these stages of, not really stages, but it maps all of these various types of right views, and that the authors of the new sutta just took that sequence that he wrote in and called that the Paticcasamuppada, to where the Buddha didn't at all. The Buddha talked about Paticcasamuppada primarily in the sense of the cause and effect relationship is that when I meets an object, that consciousness arises. That was his original point about Paticca.
Okay.
Okay, and in fact, later we'll give another talk on the on right view. That's a bit too much for tonight's talk.
Sure.
Okay, but what I do want to get into is that when we are more skilled with dealing with our minds, with mind's objects, then we begin to substitute new things from the Buddha Dhamma. Okay, you take it apart then. Okay, she's got a new toy.
Wow. Very nice.
Mm-hmm. So we were talking about the Paticca. That word actually means dependent origination, and another way of looking at it is just merely cause and effect. The Buddha actually used these words: with this, there is that. Without this, there is not that. Okay? For instance,
Yeah.
with heat, there is fire. Without heat, there is no fire. So this is what they mean, and in fact, that matches modern science completely. That Newton called it the law of entropy. No, he called it the law of inertia. Then they came up with entropy, which is, they understand that, first off, you have to understand the distinction between an open and a closed system. If a system is closed, then everything within that system will fall apart slowly. And that the thing that keeps it from falling apart slowly is that you have to introduce something from the outside, and normally that's energy. For instance, the world, planet Earth, is not a closed system. If there was no sun giving energy to the Earth, then the Earth would slowly radiate all of its energy out, and it would become dead and die. And no human life would survive. It would entropy to nothingness.
All
But
right.
with the sun, it can actually increase. Instead of just falling apart, it grows more and more and more complex. Okay, so when we look at a system like that, from entropy, when we're looking at everything, then that means that everything begins to fall apart. That on the grander scale of things, everything begins to fall apart. Now, sometimes when it goes from one state to another, when it falls apart in the sense of more complexity. For instance, a cup is simple when it's sitting on the table, but when it falls and breaks on the floor, now that cup has become very complex. So it doesn't mean that things, when they entropy, it falls into simplicity. Rather, it falls more into complexity.
Okay.
But it doesn't have to be. Okay. In fact, that if you take that cup and grind it up completely, then it's nothing but just sand. And so now the grains of sand being very similar, it looks like, in fact, it's become back to simplicity again.
Right.
Okay, so simplicity and complexity really don't have anything to do with this falling apart process. But whether it's falling apart or whether there's energy coming in from the outside, in any case, everything is constantly changing. The cause and effect relationship is in process. I don't know what she's saying. What she's saying? Oh, there's a bug. Yeah, she's into that hating bugs phases. Whenever she sees a bug, she wants me to do something about it. Okay. All right, got to go take care of a bug. Here's your bug. The light is on under the house, and they're quite large dragonfly with wingspans like this, and they come by the thousands. And they're down under the house, and the whole floor of the sandy floor is completely covered with them, and there are 3 frogs down there having an absolute feast. And that's what this is all about, is the frog feast of bugs. But I turned the light off, and now there's not.
Interesting to see the 3 frogs eating all the flies.
So that's what she wanted to show me, was the frogs eating all of the bugs. So anyway, back to what we were talking about. We haven't covered the part yet about the Sambhojana, or the 7 factors of enlightenment.
Right.
The most important quality of the 7 factors of enlightenment is the word unremitting. Most people think that meditation is that they do it a little while on the cushion, maybe 30 minutes, maybe an hour, some people 3 hours, and when they get off the cushion, then their job is finished for the day. But that's not true at all, and that we can see that completely when we look at the Sambhojana using this word unremitting, that we keep coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back. And when our mindfulness becomes unremitting, it becomes a factor of enlightenment, or a factor of awakening, that we keep coming back to it over and over and over again, which is another way of saying that we're building a new habit now. Instead of the old habits, we're developing new habits of mindfulness. Mindfulness of what? Of the Satipatthana. Now, in order to be mindful, the second part of the unremitting mindfulness, then the second one is investigation. That when our investigation becomes unremitting, well, our mindfulness, if we're directing it correctly, is an investigation. That's what mindfulness really is it's looking, it's watching, it's remembering to watch and remembering to keep track of what's going on. This is what we mean by investigation of states. That in fact, a lot of what Anapanasati is nothing but an investigation of the mind, investigation of the mind's objects, the investigation of mental states, the states of the body, the states of the feeling. All of these various states is subject to investigation through mindfulness. And when our investigation becomes unremitting, then it becomes an enlightenment factor. And as it becomes unremitting, then a new thing happens, and that is that we're developing new habits, or a new way of looking at things persistently. That when our persistence, some people, and in fact I think Bhikkhu Bodhi translated the word to energy, as if by doing an investigation constantly we're going to get a new level of energy. But I don't think that that's a good word to use. A better word to use is habit forming, that we're developing new habits, that we're getting into the habit of it, and because we're getting into the habit of watching, getting into the habit of investigation, getting into the habit of mindfulness, it becomes easier to do. In the beginning, it was hard to do, and we gave ourselves trouble about it, We're thinking that it was a monkey mind, etc., like that. But after we're getting good at it, then it becomes part of the habit. And so it's successful. And so the persistence is an energy, but it's an energy very much like the energy of the joy of success.
Right.
Okay? Now, when we develop that, when we become that way, then the joy also becomes unremitting. The joy that we've been developing intermittently now becomes persistent. It keeps coming back. It becomes like the choice of the moment. So that for instance, when you get bad news, maybe an email that's an insult or something like that, in the old days, we felt bad. Now we automatically will laugh and chuckle about it because now we have a new way of, through this enlightenment factor, we automatically choose joy over unhappiness. In the old days,
Right.
we automatically chose unhappiness. Now we have not only a new choice, but it's actually now a new habit. It becomes
Right.
habit forming to be joyful. Okay. And that as we're developing this, the body will become tranquil. We're free from tension. If we practice Anapanasati in the old classical traditional long way of doing it, we think that tranquilizing the body has to do with investigation of the body, but it doesn't. The tranquility,
Right down, Sophia. 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 Right down. Quick, quick.
the tranquility of the body will come through joy. Many people, in fact, think that within Buddhism, that if they're in the state of suffering or in a state of unhappiness, that they can come up from a negative up to zero and be balanced or equanimity in the sense of Buddhism like that. But that's not the way that it works at all, not in physics or any place else. For instance, have you ever heard of a sine wave?
Sine wave? No.
You don't know what a sine wave is?
No.
Okay. Have you ever seen, uh, let us say, sound or music displayed on a screen so that it looks like a lot of waves,
Yeah.
wavy things like this? Okay.
Like a seismograph or
All
something.
right. Okay. That's another way of talking about it. The quality of a wave is that it has a height and a depth. It has a trough and a peak. It has a zenith and a nadir, and it goes from one to the other. But at no time, in fact, does a wave go down and come up to the middle point and then stop. No,
Yeah.
once it comes down, it's got to come up again. And then, in fact, even if it's going to zero, it will go up and then down and then up and down and up and down to where it's very small, but it's still an up and down. This is an important quality because within the context of the Buddha, we have to move out of a negative space into a positive space before we can go back to the balance of zero.
Right.
No place in physics, no place in the real world does anything ever come from a negative up to a zero and then stop. All waves have both negative and positive aspects to it. So if we are stuck at a low place in a wave, we've got to go into a positive wave and then glide downhill to the valley. That's the way that we look at it. And this is why pleasure and joy is so important within Buddhism, and yet it's almost always neglected.